You're off the project until you apologize to my son. The words hung in the Zoom call like a death sentence. 89 people, cameras on, watching me get publicly executed by Timothy Martinez because his MBA prince couldn't handle being told he was wrong. I unmuted, said understood, and that's when they realized they'd just made the biggest mistake in company history. My name's Christopher Wells. I'm 48 years old, and I've been building the bones of this $600 million company since it was 30 people in a converted warehouse. Let me back up. This whole mess started when Andrew Martinez called me old school in front of the entire strategy team, smirked like he'd invented the internet, then tried to explain my own security framework back to me using a PowerPoint he'd downloaded from some tech blog. I didn't even correct him, just sat there sipping the same bitter espresso I'd been drinking for 19 years and listened to this fresh MBA graduate call my audit protocols legacy bottlenecks. That was my first clue. This wasn't about modernization. It was about erasure. Andrew didn't know the difference between access controls and user permissions. He thought segregation of duties was about organizing team meetings. Yet somehow this walking privilege explosion landed the title Director of Digital Innovation. No technical interviews, no hands-on experience, just recycled TED Talk vocabulary and a last name that made HR nod like it was 1995. Before Andrew showed up, my days were steady. Systems running clean, security protocols humming, zero breaches. I'd trained every intern they threw at me, even helped 2 former CTOs turn their relatives into decent junior developers. Both still send Christmas cards, but Andrew wanted blood. He walked in and started cutting without reading documentation. Deleted backup verification logs I'd implemented after a SOX violation in 2019. When I asked politely if he wanted to review compliance history before making changes, he waved me off. Christopher, we need to embrace agile methodology. Maybe look into it. That's when I knew we weren't in modernization. We were in a purge. His second week, Andrew pushed a memo to discontinue a monitoring tool I'd built after the Harrison Industries breach, one that cross-referenced vendor access patterns against our payroll database. His reasoning? It clutters the dashboard and slows deployment cycles. I scheduled a one-on-one. He canceled twice, then sent a Slack message. Let's focus on solutions, not problems. Thanks. No signature, no context. I documented every change, flagged security risks, sent it quietly through internal channels to compliance. Timothy Martinez called me into a Zoom the next morning. Full company, 89 people, cameras mandatory. Timothy smiled, but not the safe kind. Christopher, I understand you've been questioning our new initiatives. My son is bringing this company into the 21st century. Your resistance is creating fear. He paused. You're off the operational pipeline until you're willing to publicly apologize to Andrew for undermining his leadership. I didn't flinch, just unmuted and said, understood. The room went silent. But when I said understood, I wasn't agreeing. I was calculating. Andrew didn't bother reading file names before dragging them to trash, just labeled anything older than 3 years technical debt and wiped out 6 cross-verification nodes I'd built after our last compliance audit. One caught 2 fraudulent invoices in 2021, saving us $180,000. But according to Andrew, if it wasn't in his color-coded Jira board, it didn't matter. He'd used the phrase archaeological code in a team meeting, as if 2 decades of institutional memory were fossils to sweep aside so Daddy could brag about lean digital transformation in investor calls. I sent Andrew a detailed message about vulnerability his deletions exposed, one allowing duplicate vendor IDs to bypass invoice verification. Attached screenshots and step-by-step breakdown. He replied 4 hours later. Thanks for feedback. Let's stay solution-oriented moving forward. Rich coming from someone who thought sandbox environment meant upgrading browsers. I escalated through proper channels, quietly, using secure workflow I'd helped legal establish years ago, not trying to embarrass him, trying to protect us. You'd think a $600 million company would care about safeguards keeping us out of federal court, but they cared about hierarchy. Andrew's last name sat at the pyramid top. When Timothy got wind of my escalation, he didn't call a meeting, didn't ask for context, didn't review flagged risks, duplicate payment vulnerabilities, potential liability exposure. He scheduled another all-hands Zoom, cameras on, Andrew's face glowing like he'd solved world hunger. Christopher, Timothy began, adjusting his tie like delivering a eulogy. "We've received reports you're creating internal friction. My son is innovating, and you're clinging to outdated systems. Effective immediately, you're removed from operational projects unless you're willing to publicly apologize for questioning leadership." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone's microphone caught sharp breath. Most stared at screens like hostages, pretending not to hear ransom demands. Andrew didn't speak, just smiled that half smirk of someone who's never earned authority, just inherited it like a trust fund. I unmuted, said understood, and logged off. No rebuttal, no dramatic exit speech. Real power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, quiet and patient, until the room forgets where it came from. I didn't rush to draft resignation. Instead, I sat at my home office desk, letting silence settle. Hands steady. No rage, no panic, just cold clarity. They'd mistaken quiet for weak. Big mistake. I opened an encrypted drive I hadn't touched in years. Buried inside were digital artifacts from a version of me they'd all forgotten. A younger Christopher back when I still went by consultant instead of legacy. Employee. That was my original title on the contract from 2004. Senior Systems Consultant, pre-acquisition, pre-rebrand, pre-every suit who walked in pretending this place was built yesterday. I found the addendum with the clause I'd drafted myself, back when I didn't trust handshake deals. Section 7C. In the event of project removal without due process or documented cause, contractor retains exclusive licensing rights to proprietary system modules created independently during original architecture development, including but not limited to security frameworks, compliance protocols, and integrated monitoring dashboards. Simple terms. If they cut me without legitimate cause, I own the foundation. They'd never amended it. Never noticed it. Not once in 19 years of contract renewals. I started building my exit strategy the same way I built everything else. Quietly, methodically, no loose ends. Logged into my admin console, the real one, not the pretty interface Andrew had commissioned for user experience optimization. I didn't revoke anything immediately, just set expiration timers on 3 key licenses tied to core infrastructure sync. Not deletions, graceful shutdowns, nothing triggering immediate alerts. Then I opened my asset inventory. Every system, every protocol, every vendor integration where my consulting company, Wells Technical Solutions, appeared in contract fine print. My LLC had never been formally dissolved, just kept dormant until now. First, disable license handshake for the security monitoring dashboard. Second, expire backup sync permissions to Andrew's investor-ready metrics portal, the one he kept showcasing in Thursday demos. Third, prepare documentation transfer of encryption logs to legal, standard procedure for departing contractors. On paper, it looked like routine cleanup, but anyone with half a brain would realize what was missing once dominoes started falling. I encrypted the logout sequences, labeled them session rotation maintenance, and set them to cascade over 48 hours, just enough delay to avoid suspicion until too late. Then I pulled out a USB drive from my desk drawer, sitting there since 2016. Inside, the only working copy of our compliance audit logs from SOX implementation. No cloud backup, no redundancy, just mine. This wasn't revenge, it was insurance. If they were kicking me out of the house I built, they weren't keeping the keys. The first system hiccup happened Tuesday morning. The investor portal threw a soft timeout error. Nothing catastrophic yet. Andrew probably blamed server lag or forgot to renew some API token. I could picture him calling help desk blaming offshore contractors before checking error logs. If he had checked, he would have seen the status message. License authentication failed. Handshake inactive. That handshake used to be automatic until I turned it off. Meanwhile, his beloved Apollo Analytics dashboard, the one he'd named like launching satellites, started loading blank tiles, then froze completely. He'd hard-coded it to pull from live data view that I'd filtered through secondary verification layers. Without my access key, it saw nothing but empty tables. Nobody suspected sabotage yet. That's the beauty of professional exits. Everyone's too busy with their next meeting to notice what's slowly breaking until lights go out completely. Legal caught the first real scent Wednesday afternoon. A vendor renewal auto-flagged for manual review. Wells Technical Solutions LLC, my dormant consulting company that technically owned half the intellectual property they'd been using for free. Someone in procurement forwarded it with red flag to legal department. I imagined some junior associate squinting at metadata, wondering why this shell company just triggered licensing conflict alert. I walked into HR Thursday morning with resignation printed and folded, slid it across the desk with my badge like returning a library book. The receptionist smiled too brightly. "Oh, transferring to another department?" I didn't answer, just nodded and said, "Thanks for everything," walking out before she could flip the letter open. She wouldn't have understood the last page anyway. The one detailing retained intellectual property rights and timestamp of my final system access. Outside, it was overcast, but not raining. Not a storm, just the kind of gray that makes everything look different than yesterday. Back in the office, they were scrambling, but not for the right reasons yet. Andrew was probably calling it network latency. Legal was flagging expired contractor agreements with phrases like potential exposure. Timothy was likely rehearsing investor call talking points about operational streamlining without realizing ground was shifting beneath his feet. This was the phase nobody notices, when pieces shift slightly out of alignment. Not broken yet, just disconnected. When you disconnect enough threads, even the most expensive tapestry starts unraveling. Andrew strutted in Monday morning like he'd personally invented cloud computing. Designer coffee in hand, wireless earbuds glowing, fake confidence of someone who'd confused silence for surrender. He finger-gunned the receptionist, who looked like she was trying to disappear into her monitor, then swaggered down the hall like a dog off its leash. When he reached my row, he paused, really looked at my empty desk. No coffee mug, no sticky note reminders, no worn mouse pad I'd used since Clinton administration, just dull silence of someone who'd left with purpose. "Learned your lesson, huh?" he mumbled to the empty chair, trying to look authoritative for the junior developer nearby who blinked confused and went back to pretending her screen wasn't frozen. Across the building, in a conference room with blackout blinds and 4 standing desks, panic was setting in. An alert had triggered at 7:52 a.m. Critical, unauthorized credential access detected. Core license validation failed. Normally, that would be routine IT drama. Someone fat-fingered a password. A vendor changed their API. But this alert was tied to their financial reporting engine. The license key didn't just fail, it returned null. No backup, no fallback, no shadow system. The platform didn't just reject access, it had no idea what access meant anymore. At 8:18 a.m., a Level 3 support tech sent an internal message to his team lead. "Weird thing. Wells Technical Solutions is showing as license owner for reporting infrastructure. Isn't that Christopher's old consulting company?" At 8:24 a.m., the legal team's Slack channel went from idle chatter to emergency mode. Sarah Johnson, the paralegal, posted a screenshot of an unfiled agreement dated 2004. System continuity rights remain property of Wells Technical Solutions unless advisory contract terminated per Section 14B. No corporate signature, no amendment, just my initials and a digital timestamp that was still valid. By 8:31 a.m., Timothy's phone was buzzing with messages from Sarah. "Are you aware Christopher Wells still holds primary licensing for our core financial systems? This affects investor reporting immediately." He didn't respond because Andrew was frantically refreshing his dashboard, watching every chart he'd promised to show investors load as white rectangles and error messages. Confidence is fragile currency. One bad morning, one failed demo, one buried contract clause, and suddenly you're not the future of the company. You're just the kid who broke the plumbing trying to redecorate the bathroom. By 9:47 a.m., half the board preparation materials had failed validation. Every export button returned a polite 502 error, service temporarily unavailable. But there was nothing temporary about it. Those reports were scheduled to go live by noon for investor review. Without them, the whole quarterly presentation collapsed like a house of cards in a ceiling fan. The head of finance was pacing. Andrew had stopped smiling. Their junior analyst was desperately copy-pasting screenshots into PowerPoint slides, but the graphs weren't just broken. The underlying data was locked. The access pathways they'd relied on for years were no longer theirs to open. At 10:03 a.m., Sarah from legal burst into Timothy's glass office without knocking. He didn't look up from his laptop, fingers frozen over the keyboard like it might type an apology for him. Did you terminate Christopher publicly? She asked, breathless, holding 3 printed pages marked with fluorescent tabs. He blinked. What? Did you publicly remove him from projects on record during a company-wide call? Timothy sat back. I told him to apologize to Andrew or step aside. He chose to step aside. Sarah stared like he'd admitted to embezzlement. Oh no, she whispered, then louder. You can't do that, not with his original contract terms active. She slapped the papers on his desk. Section 7C. He retains software licensing rights and conditional IP ownership tied to advisory status. If he's removed without documented cause, he owns the monitoring systems, the compliance frameworks, the audit infrastructure. It's not company IP. It's his IP that we've been licensing through Wells Technical Solutions under active consulting terms. You just severed that relationship. Timothy's face went pale. That was 20 years ago. Surely it expired. It was renewed in 2019, Sarah cut him off. We filed a standard extension during our SOX compliance phase. Christopher's signature, no executive counter-signature. It defaulted to his original terms. But he's just an employee. He was a co-founder consultant, she snapped, and now he's a hostile vendor. By 11:17 a.m., 6 investors had requested final packet access. None could open the files. The system kept redirecting to a deactivated portal with a banner reading, Contact Wells Technical Solutions for licensing authorization. That was me. I'd changed it over the weekend from powered by internal systems to something more accurate. Andrew had locked himself in a conference room, probably Googling emergency intellectual property override, but there wasn't one. Not for systems built by hand, module by module, by someone who never believed in giving away blueprints to people who couldn't be bothered to read the manual. What they'd called legacy bloat was actually leverage, and they were watching it slip through their fingers in real time. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. sharp. Every executive cleared their calendars. No agenda distributed, no preparation materials, just a single subject line from the chairman: System Access Crisis. Immediate review required. The first slide wasn't a chart. It was a blank screen with one line of red text: Q3 Compliance Audit Trail, File Not Found. That's when the whispers started. Turns out Andrew's modernization wasn't just cosmetic. In his rush to make things look streamlined, he'd deleted the master compliance log database, the one I'd specifically warned him about in our last email exchange. No versioning, no incremental backups, no cloud redundancy. He'd replaced everything with a custom reporting interface that looked clean until you tried to access historical data and found nothing underneath. The problem: that audit trail wasn't optional. It was a federal requirement for 2 overlapping government contracts. The absence alone triggered automatic investigation protocols. They couldn't fake a backup now, not with timestamp discrepancies already flagged in the metadata. Someone asked about recovery options. Sarah replied with devastating simplicity. Christopher Wells was the sole custodian of the encrypted archive under contractor agreement. Silence. That was the moment panic shifted to calculation. I wasn't just the guy who quit. I was the only person on Earth who knew where the digital bodies were buried and how to properly exhume them. At 2:34 p.m., my phone buzzed. Personal email, not from Timothy or Andrew, but from Jennifer Adams, the CEO's assistant. Someone I had worked with quietly for years, passing compliance notes and system updates before Slack ruined everything. Subject: today's situation. Message: Christopher, hope you're well. Things have gotten complicated here. Would you be open to a conversation? No agenda, just an opportunity to talk. Jennifer. I didn't respond immediately, just sat at my kitchen table watching afternoon light shift across my laptop screen, wondering how many of them finally understood that redundant didn't mean replaceable. I wasn't an employee anymore, wasn't even a contractor. I was a single point of failure they'd never documented because they assumed they'd never need to. And now, they had no choice but to ask nicely. The leverage didn't come from anger or threats. It came from being the last person who understood how everything actually connected. That suddenly made me indispensable again. Meanwhile, Andrew was discovering what happens when you delete the foundation while standing on the second floor. Gravity doesn't negotiate. I never went back to that building, never walked through those glass doors again, never sat in another conference room with motivational posters about synergy and innovation. I was done with their world, but my world found me. 3 days after their emergency board meeting, Jennifer Adams called my personal number. "Christopher, I need to be direct. The board is asking if you'd consider a consulting arrangement. Temporary, just to stabilize systems until we can transition properly." I let the silence stretch. What kind of consulting arrangement? Executive level? Full system access? Your rate? Your terms? Timothy's been removed from operational oversight. Andrew's been reassigned to strategic initiatives. Strategic initiatives. Corporate speak for we can't fire the CEO's son, so we're putting him in a closet with crayons. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. The next morning, Wells Technical Solutions appeared on TechFlow's active vendor list. No announcement, no company-wide memo, just a line item. Critical Infrastructure Consulting, Priority 1 authorization. The retainer figure next to it was more than my annual salary had ever been, but I didn't take it. Not yet. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. Unknown number, 312 area code. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, professional. "Mr. Wells, I represent Hartley Investment Group, the primary fund backing TechFlow Solutions. We've reviewed your system architecture work. It was impressive, elegant, secure, future-proof. We're interested in discussing consulting opportunities across our portfolio if you're available." She didn't say who specifically she worked for. She didn't need to. People like her don't call unless the room has already decided. That afternoon, I drove past TechFlow's office complex. 3 news vans in the parking lot. A reporter doing a stand-up in front of the main entrance. The stock ticker at the bottom of my phone showed their shares down 23% since my departure. TechFlow Solutions. Under SEC investigation for compliance violations, scrolled across the business news feed. Andrew had been promoted again to Senior Advisor, Digital Transformation. Another meaningless title with an office where he could spend his days writing blockchain proposals nobody would read. Timothy had stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic vision. Translation: forced resignation with a golden parachute. 3 months later, Wells Technical Solutions had 8 corporate clients, all referred through Hartley's network. Companies that understood the difference between innovation and destruction, between efficiency and negligence. Places where experience was valued, not discarded. My new office was 20 minutes from TechFlow's headquarters, but it might as well have been on another planet. No open-plan seating, no kombucha taps, no motivational posters about disrupting industries. Just quiet competence and the kind of respect that comes when people understand what they're paying for. Jennifer Adams left TechFlow 6 months after I did. She called to thank me for the reference letter I'd written when she applied to be COO at a startup. "You saved me from that sinking ship," she said. "I should have left with you." Sarah Johnson from legal took a position at Hartley Investment Group as their compliance director. Her first assignment was reviewing TechFlow's asset recovery plan. Small world. The final chapter came exactly 1 year later. TechFlow Solutions was acquired by their largest competitor for 40 cents on the dollar. The press release cited integration challenges and regulatory compliance costs as factors affecting the purchase price. Translation: nobody wanted to inherit the mess Andrew had created. The acquiring company brought in their own technical team. They spent 6 months trying to rebuild the systems Andrew had deleted before finally calling me. "Mr. Wells, we understand you designed the original architecture. Would you consider a consulting contract to help with knowledge transfer?" I considered it for about 3 seconds. "I'm afraid my schedule is full for the next year, but I can recommend some excellent junior developers if you're interested in starting from scratch." The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd have to rebuild everything I'd originally built, except now it would cost them $2 million instead of the $180,000 they'd been paying me annually. Andrew Martinez's LinkedIn profile now lists him as entrepreneurial leader and innovation catalyst with no current employer. His latest post is about embracing failure as a learning opportunity. It has 3 likes. Timothy found a position as Chief Digital Officer at a mid-sized logistics company. He lasted 8 months before being transitioned to an advisory role. Some people never learn that titles don't create competence. Last month, I spoke at the National Cybersecurity Conference about legacy system architecture and institutional knowledge preservation. The audience was 400 senior IT professionals, most of them gray-haired veterans like me who'd watched companies destroy themselves chasing the latest trends. During the Q&A, someone asked about dealing with age discrimination in tech. I kept my answer simple. Build things so well that they can't function without you. Then make sure the contracts reflect that reality. The applause lasted longer than I expected. That evening, I sat in my home office, the same kitchen table where I'd planned my exit from TechFlow. My laptop showed Wells Technical Solutions' quarterly revenue report. We were profitable, growing steadily, taking on only clients who understood the value of experience over enthusiasm. The screen faded to black as I closed the laptop. Outside, it was drizzling again, the same kind of gray afternoon when I'd walked out of TechFlow for the last time. But everything had changed. I'd built something that lasted 19 years. They'd destroyed it in 19 days. The difference? I knew where the blueprints were buried. Some lessons can't be taught in MBA programs or TED Talks. Some lessons only come from watching the lights go out when you assumed they'd stay on forever. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and smart enough, you get to be the one who controls the switch. The quiet guy doesn't always lose. Sometimes he just waits for the right moment to remind everyone who really built the house.